This story begins, as so many unsettling tales do, not with a bang, but with a whisper of malice disguised as kindness. The title you might have seen, the one that perhaps drew you in, is My Mother-in-Law Added Something to My Drink at Dinner. I swapped it with her husband's. And then the truth unraveled. And it started with a smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes, and a glass raised in a toast that felt more like a veiled threat than a genuine welcome. My name is David Miller. I'm 32 years old, and I've built a life, a career, as an independent photographer here in the quiet beauty of Maple Creek, Vermont. It's a demanding life, especially when you're chasing the perfect light for American Wilderness Monthly out on the Dakota Plains, like I had been for the past week, trudging through knee-deep snow, battling the elements to capture the raw majesty of bison against a frozen landscape. It's exhilarating, but it leaves you bone-tired. All I'd wanted was a hot shower and a long sleep, but it was Eleanor's birthday. My mother-in-law and my wife, Sarah, had insisted. Just a couple of hours. David, she'd promised, her hand squeezing mine. It'll mean a lot to her. So, there I was, at their sprawling colonial-style home in the most expensive part of town, trying to shake off the weariness. The dinner conversation was its usual predictable dance. Arthur, my father-in-law, an investment banker who measured a man's worth in stock options and square footage, was holding forth about his latest lucrative deal. Eleanor, meticulous and ever the hostess, fussed over table settings that were already perfect. Sarah's brother, Robert, and his wife, Linda, made polite, if somewhat strained, conversation. I mostly listened, nursed a beer, and mentally counted the minutes until we could gracefully make our exit. Then came dessert, and Eleanor announced she'd made her famous sangria. She disappeared into the kitchen, and a moment later, as I offered to help carry things in, she cornered me. "David, darling," she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too sweet. She held out a glass, already filled. "I made a special cocktail just for you, for my favorite son-in-law." Her eyes, I noticed, darted around the kitchen for a split second before settling on mine, and there was the slightest tremor in her fingers as she extended the glass. A knot tightened in my stomach. Something wasn't right. After 6 years of being married to Sarah, 6 years of navigating the Vance's subtle and not-so-subtle disapproval of my chosen path, my senses were finely tuned to these undercurrents. My photography hobby, as Arthur often called it, had never been enough for them. They'd envisioned someone different for Sarah, someone more like them. I thanked Eleanor, forcing a smile, and took the glass. As she turned to retrieve other glasses, I feigned interest in a small painting on the kitchen wall. Arthur, back in the dining room, was engrossed in his phone, a familiar sight. He was a man who always found my presence slightly irritating, always quick with a veiled criticism of my career. With a swift, discreet movement, my heart thumping a quiet rhythm against my ribs, I switched my untouched glass with the identical one sitting near his usual place setting. It was a simple exchange, over in a second. What possesses someone to offer a gift that feels more like a curse? One simple act, a silent exchange of glasses, and the course of everything was about to change. But how deeply? David couldn't yet fathom. The air in that opulent dining room suddenly felt charged, thick with unspoken tensions and a danger I was only just beginning to comprehend. This night, I sensed, was about more than just a birthday celebration. It was a culmination, a breaking point. The quiet war of attrition they had waged against my standing in the family, against my very identity, felt like it was about to erupt. This story, you see, isn't just about a spiked drink. It's about the fight for respect, the slow, painful unraveling of carefully constructed deceptions, and the incredible strength a marriage can find when pressed to its limits by external forces. It's a journey into the heart of a family dynamic where appearances are everything, and the truth is a dangerous commodity. The most compelling insight, perhaps, is how sometimes the quietest, most unassuming actions can trigger the loudest, most life-altering consequences. Before we dive into the chaos that followed that seemingly innocent drink, let me paint a clearer picture of the landscape David, or rather, I had been navigating for 6 long years with Eleanor and Arthur Vance. It's a journey that will test loyalties, expose secrets, and ultimately redefine what family truly means. 6 years. 6 years of forced smiles, of biting back retorts, of walking on eggshells in their perfectly appointed home. 6 years of trying to earn a respect from Eleanor and Arthur Vance that was, perhaps, never truly on offer. At least not for someone like me, someone who chose passion over a predictable paycheck in their eyes. My life with Sarah began 6 years ago, at an art exhibition in a small gallery downtown. My wildlife photography was featured, a collection from a recent trip to the Alaskan tundra. Sarah was there, finishing her master's degree in environmental science. She didn't just see pictures, she saw the stories, the effort, the soul behind them. We connected instantly, two people who understood the world through different lenses, but shared a profound appreciation for its beauty and its fragility. She understood my need to capture the world, and I admired her passion for protecting it. It felt like finding a missing piece of myself. Her parents, however, were another story entirely. From our very first meeting, Arthur made his expectations clear. He sat me down in his leather-chaired study, a place that smelled of old money and expensive cigars, and told me, "I'll be honest, David, we expected someone different for Sarah, someone with a more traditional career path, a desk job, a real retirement plan, a company car, someone more like me." Eleanor was subtler, her disapproval veiled in polite inquiries. She'd praise my photographs, calling them quite lovely, then immediately follow with, "And when do you plan to settle into something more stable? Dear, photography is such a precarious profession." It was a constant low hum of disapproval. At family functions, Eleanor would often introduce me to their friends as Sarah's friend, David, the photographer, conspicuously omitting son-in-law, as if my profession somehow disqualified me from full family membership. I remember last Christmas vividly. I'd stepped out onto their heated porch for a breath of fresh air and overheard Eleanor on the phone in the den, her voice carrying clearly through the slightly ajar door. "Oh, Helen," she was saying to one of her friends, "Sarah could have married Dr. Fieldstone. You know, he's an orthopedic surgeon at Clearview Regional Hospital. Wonderful family, plenty of money, but she chose the creative one." The way she paused before the word creative, the faint sigh that accompanied it, made it sound less like a description and more like a diagnosis of a regrettable, possibly terminal, illness. And when Sarah and I joyfully announced we were trying for a baby, hoping to start our own family, Arthur pulled me aside. "Children are expensive, our son," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder with a grip that felt more like a warning. "Maybe think about real employment before bringing one into the world." I never told Sarah about these direct comments. She loved her parents, despite their flaws, and I didn't want to force her to choose sides, to tarnish her image of them if I could help it. So, I smiled, shook Arthur's hand firmly at every visit, complimented Eleanor's often overcooked roasts, and kept my true thoughts to myself. But back to Eleanor's birthday dinner, the one that was about to change everything. As dessert was being cleared, Eleanor announced her famous sangria. She swept into the kitchen, and a moment later, I followed, offering to help carry the glasses. That's when I saw it. She had 2 glasses, filled with the dark red liquid, set apart from the others on the granite countertop. As I entered, she quickly, almost furtively, uncapped a small, clear vial and tipped something into one of them. It was colorless, odorless, and disappeared instantly into the sangria. She tucked the vial away into her apron pocket the moment she heard my footsteps. "Oh, David!" she exclaimed, her voice a little too high, a little too cheerful. "I've got this. This one's for you, a special recipe, just for my favorite son-in-law." She handed me one of the 2 glasses. My throat tightened. As I took it, I tilted it slightly, as if admiring the color. Under the bright kitchen lights, I could see it, a barely perceptible, oily film floating on the surface, catching the light in a way the other glass, which she picked up, did not. "Let me help you carry these," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, and took both prepared glasses from her, the one intended for me and the one she'd presumably intended for herself or another guest. In the dining room, Arthur was, as usual, checking his phone, barely looking up as I approached. "Sangria, sir?" I asked, placing the tampered glass, the one with the telltale film, the one she'd handed to me, directly in front of him. He grunted in acknowledgement without looking up. I made a plausible excuse about preferring water with my dessert, citing the long drive from the Dakota Plains and a need to stay alert. 45 minutes later, the convivial atmosphere, already strained for me, shattered. Arthur, mid-sentence during a boast about a golf game at the Oakwood Country Club, suddenly went pale, sweat beaded on his forehead. He clutched his stomach, a look of pained surprise on his face, and then he was rushing, stumbling almost, towards the downstairs bathroom. The violent sounds of his illness echoed through the otherwise quiet house. Sarah gasped, jumping up to follow him. Robert and Linda exchanged worried glances, but it was Eleanor's reaction that riveted me. Her face drained of all color, her eyes wide not with concern for her husband, but with a dawning, horrified understanding. She looked from the bathroom door, then her gaze shot across the table, locking with mine, and in that instant, I knew two things with absolute certainty. My mother-in-law had tried to drug me, and she knew, with chilling clarity, that I knew. Her eyes, they held not a shred of concern for Arthur, only a chilling realization. What kind of person does this to their own family, even by mistake, or was it a mistake at all? The question hung in the air between us, unspoken but deafening. The charade of a happy family dinner shattered in that moment, splintering like fragile glass, replaced by a stark, ugly truth that began to seep out like a poison, tainting everything. Chaos erupted. Sarah, her face etched with worry, rushed to her father's side, her voice a murmur of concern through the closed bathroom door. Eleanor, usually so composed, so in control of every social nuance, was stammering, her hands fluttering. "It must have been the shellfish," she exclaimed, a little too loudly, to no one in particular. Or perhaps the oysters weren't fresh food poisoning, almost certainly. She avoided my gaze, but I could feel the weight of her awareness, a palpable tension in the room. While the others were distracted by Arthur's dramatic illness, I moved with a quiet purpose that surprised even myself. The untouched glass of sangria, the one Eleanor had so graciously prepared for me, still sat on the side table where I'd placed it after the swap. Under the guise of clearing away dessert plates, I carefully picked it up, ensuring no one else touched it, and discreetly slipped it into a sealable plastic bag I surprisingly found in my camera bag, a leftover from protecting lenses in dusty environments. I then tucked it away. Something inside me had shifted, not into a hot, explosive rage, but into something colder, more deliberate. It was as if years of enduring their subtle barbs and overt criticisms had finally coalesced into a single point of ice-cold resolve, a glacier calving, as I thought of it later, a huge, cold, deliberate shift. I wasn't just going to let this go. This wasn't just another slight, another insult to be swallowed. This was an act of malice, premeditated and potentially dangerous. The following Monday, back in the familiar surroundings of my Maple Creek studio, the images from the Dakota Plains temporarily forgotten, I took the sealed bag containing the sangria glass to Dr. Mark Peterson. He ran Peterson Analytical Services, a toxicology lab, and I'd done some commercial photography for his company's brochure a couple of years back. He was a professional, discreet. "Mark," I said, keeping my voice even, "I have a bit of a strange request. It's a family matter." I explained I needed the contents of the glass analyzed, no questions asked beyond what was necessary for the testing. He nodded, his expression unreadable but professional. 3 agonizing days later, Dr. Peterson called. His voice was serious. "David," he began, "we found significant traces of benzodiazepines in this sample, specifically a compound consistent with a drug called Valerium. It's a potent sedative, often prescribed for anxiety. In this concentration, not lethal, but certainly enough to knock someone out for several hours, maybe even cause some short-term memory loss or significant disorientation." He paused, then asked, "Where on earth did you get this?" "David, A chill traced its way down my spine despite the warmth of the spring afternoon. Valerium. I thanked him, asked for a comprehensive written report, but offered no further explanation. The confirmation was a heavy weight in my gut. That night, I told Sarah I wanted to skip the upcoming Sunday dinners at her parents' house for a while. I need to focus on this upcoming exhibition at the Main Street Gallery in Brookside, I told her, which was true, but not the whole truth. She was disappointed. I could see it in her eyes. Family dinners, however strained, were a ritual she clung to. But she understood, or at least, she accepted my reason. I didn't tell her about the test results. Not yet. The truth was too monstrous, too unbelievable without more than just my word. I needed to understand more myself. Over the next 2 weeks, I did some quiet, careful digging. It wasn't difficult to find out. Through discreet inquiries with a pharmacist I knew from a nearby town sworn to absolute secrecy. Of course, that Eleanor Vance indeed had prescriptions for Valerium. Not just one, but from 3 different doctors in 3 different towns across the county line. My pharmacist friend, looking troubled, hinted that the dosages she'd been obtaining were unusually high, the refill patterns irregular. It suggested she'd been stockpiling, possibly doubling or even tripling her prescribed doses for years. This wasn't just a desperate one-time act aimed at me. This was potentially a woman with a serious, long-term prescription drug problem, one that made her unpredictable, perhaps even reckless. The realization was deeply unsettling. The narrative was shifting from a targeted attack to something possibly more complex, more indicative of a deeper personal crisis on Eleanor's part. But that didn't lessen the danger she posed or the intent behind her actions that night. It's a terrifying thought, isn't it? That someone you know, someone in your family, could be capable of such calculated harm, veiled by a veneer of normalcy. When trust is so profoundly broken, what are the first steps one even takes to find solid ground again? To understand the full scope of the deception I was determined to find out. Confronted with the undeniable, some people crumble, their defenses shattering under the weight of truth. Others, like Eleanor Vance, it seemed, simply doubled down on their deception, their justifications twisting like smoke to obscure the stark reality of their actions. My investigation into Eleanor's life continued, painting an increasingly disturbing picture. Beyond the Valerium prescriptions, whispers and old stories began to surface. I learned, through a carefully cultivated conversation with a former disgruntled employee of the Oakwood Country Club, about Eleanor's strange behavior at a recent charity auction, a public outburst that was quickly hushed up. Then, a more concrete anecdote from an old acquaintance of Sarah's family, a lingering accusation from years ago, about Eleanor pocketing a rather valuable piece of jewelry at a neighbor's cocktail party. The Vances, with their wealth and influence, had handled it, of course, ensuring it never became a public scandal. These were stories her family had worked tirelessly to bury, fragments of a hidden life that hinted at a pattern of instability and questionable integrity. I compiled everything meticulously: the toxicology report from Peterson Analytical Services, the printouts detailing her multiple Valerium prescriptions, notes on these unsettling rumors. Each piece of information was a small, sharp stone in the mosaic of her deceit. The moment to act, to confront her, arrived unexpectedly. Sarah mentioned one evening, a touch of surprise in her voice, that her mother needed some new photographs for a social media profile for one of her charity committees, Sarah explained. And David, she specifically asked if you would take them. The request was so out of character, so directly engaging with my professional life she usually dismissed, that it felt like either a bizarre olive branch or, more likely, a trap. I agreed. The following Saturday, I drove to the Vance estate alone. My camera bag, usually filled with lenses and light meters, felt heavier than usual. In an inner compartment rested a sealed manila envelope. Eleanor greeted me at the door, a picture of expensive elegance, her makeup perfect, her smile a practiced veneer. Arthur, she explained, was at the office, a convenient absence. We made small talk as I scouted locations in their manicured garden, the air thick with unspoken things. Finally, as she was about to pose by a rose trellis, I paused. Before we start, Eleanor, I said, my voice quiet but firm, I thought you might want to see this. I handed her the manila envelope. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled, almost imperceptibly, as she took it. She opened it, her eyes scanning the toxicology report, then the prescription printouts. The color drained from her face, leaving her carefully applied blush standing out in stark relief. This is absurd," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her gaze fixed on the damning papers. I would never. We both know what happened. Eleanor." I cut her off, my own voice devoid of heat, filled only with a cold certainty. "What I don't know is why." For a moment, she seemed to shrink, the regal posture faltering. But then, something shifted in her eyes. The fear, the feigned innocence, was replaced by a sudden, chilling hardness. Her face became a mask of resentment. "You're not good enough for my daughter," she hissed, the words dripping with years of suppressed disdain. "You never have been. You never will be. A real man provides security. David, a future, not just pretty pictures. And drugging your daughter's husband, that provides security," I asked, keeping my voice level, refusing to be drawn into her emotional storm. She actually scoffed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Oh, please," she snapped, her composure cracking to reveal the ugliness beneath. "It wasn't going to hurt you, not seriously. Just make you sick for a day or two. Make you miss that ridiculous gallery opening you've been prattling on about for months. I wanted to show Sarah, once and for all, how unreliable you are, how you can't be counted on." The casual cruelty of her admission, the complete lack of remorse, was staggering. I let her words hang in the oppressive silence of the perfectly tended garden. "Here's what happens next. Eleanor," I said finally, my gaze unwavering. "You're going to tell Arthur exactly what you did, what you put in that glass, and then you're both going to start treating me with the respect I deserve. Not because you've suddenly had a change of heart about who I am, but because the alternative is Sarah finding out precisely who her parents truly are, what they're capable of." Eleanor laughed then, a brittle, hollow sound that echoed unnervingly among the roses. "She'll never believe you over us. David, we're her family." I picked up my camera bag, the photo shoot clearly over before it had even begun. "Maybe not," I conceded, "but she'll believe a certified lab report from Peterson Analytical Services. She'll believe the documented evidence of your multiple Valerium prescriptions. And I suspect she'll believe the whispers from the neighbors you've alienated over the years. Are you willing to bet your entire relationship with your daughter on that, Eleanor?" I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there amidst the perfect flowers, the damning evidence clutched in her trembling hand. The mask had slipped. Beneath the polished, socially acceptable exterior of Eleanor Vance was something ugly, desperate, and cornered. But now the ball was in her court. Would she confess to Arthur and begin the difficult process of accountability? Or would she attempt to weave an even more elaborate web of lies, forcing my hand further? The well-being of my marriage, the emotional safety of Sarah, depended entirely on what she chose to do next. The truth, once set in motion, has a way of carving its own relentless path, often cutting through the very hearts it's destined to break before any semblance of healing can begin. Eleanor Vance, true to her manipulative form, did not choose confession or accountability. Instead, she chose to double down on her deception, attempting to wrest control of the narrative before it could escape her grasp entirely. That very night, my phone rang. It was Sarah, her voice tight with unshed tears and a confusion that tore at my heart. "David," she began, her voice trembling. "Mom just called me. She was hysterical. She said you were awful to her today, that you came over for the photo shoot and were inappropriate, hostile, even threatening. What on earth happened?" The weight of Eleanor's lie, so bold, so predictably self-serving, settled heavily in the room. I couldn't shield Sarah any longer. The time for half-truths and protective omissions was over. With a heavy heart, I sat her down on our old sofa, the one we'd bought together from a thrift store in our first year of marriage, and I told her everything. I laid out the toxicology report from Peterson Analytical Services, the stark black and white of it irrefutable. I showed her the printouts of Eleanor's multiple Valerium prescriptions from doctors she'd clearly been deceiving. I even recounted Eleanor's chilling justification in the garden, her admission that she'd intended to make me sick, to make me unreliable. As a final, painful piece of evidence, I showed Sarah a folder of text messages I'd saved over the years, messages from Eleanor that had, almost imperceptibly at first, grown increasingly critical, then subtly hostile, especially when Sarah and I had achieved small milestones or expressed happiness in our unconventional life. My mother wouldn't do this," Sarah kept repeating, her voice a choked whisper, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. But the conviction in her words was hollow, eroded by the mountain of evidence before her. Her face was pale, her hands twisting in her lap. The carefully constructed image of her mother, the one she had cherished her whole life, was beginning to crumble. The next day, armed with a terrible, burgeoning understanding, Sarah went to confront her parents. I didn't go with her. This was a confrontation she needed to have, a truth she needed to hear or not hear from their own lips. She returned hours later, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen from crying, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Dad says it's all a misunderstanding," she reported, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. He says you're just trying to drive a wedge between us, between me and them, because you're insecure about your career, jealous of their success." I just nodded, a wave of weary resignation washing over me. I had expected this closing of ranks, this gaslighting. "And what do you think, Sarah?" I asked gently. She didn't answer. She simply crawled into bed, turned her back to me, and the silence in our small Maple Creek home became a vast, echoing chasm. For 2 long, agonizing weeks, she barely spoke to me. She went to her parents' house alone several times, each visit seeming to reinforce their narrative, each return home marked by fresh tears, new doubts flickering in her eyes, and a deeper withdrawal from me. I threw myself into my work, spending long hours at the studio, preparing for the Brookside Gallery exhibition, waiting for the storm to pass, my heart aching with a mixture of frustration and a deep, empathetic pain for what she was going through. I felt like I'd pushed back against their tide, only to find myself dragged deeper into their treacherous currents, now cast as the villain in their twisted family drama. Then, one afternoon, a plain, padded envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name, David Miller, printed in an unfamiliar, neat, slightly feminine handwriting. My heart quickened. Inside, there was no letter. Only a small USB drive and a folded piece of paper with 3 typewritten words. "You should see this." And beneath it, 2 initials, L.V., Linda Vance, Robert's wife. My hands trembled slightly as I inserted the USB drive into my laptop. It contained several video files, clearly labeled with dates and times. Home security footage from the Vance estate. The first file was from the night of Eleanor's birthday dinner. There was Eleanor, in her kitchen, just as I'd seen her, furtively adding something from that small vial to a glass of sangria. There I was, entering the kitchen. There I was, taking the 2 prepared glasses. Then, the damning shot Arthur, in the dining room, picking up the tampered glass and drinking from it. But there was more. So much more. Footage from after Sarah and I had left that night. Eleanor, her face a mask of fury, screaming at Arthur in their opulent living room. "How could you be so stupid? How could you drink the wrong one?" And Arthur, his voice equally loud, equally furious, yelling back, "This isn't the first time you've done something like this. Eleanor, you and your damn pills." I watched the footage 3 times, trying to process the raw, ugly reality of it. It wasn't just confirmation of Eleanor's actions against me, it was irrefutable evidence of a pattern of behavior, and, most shockingly, clear proof that Arthur knew he was complicit, not just in covering for her, but in being aware of her dangerous tendencies. The next file was dated 2 days after the dinner. Eleanor and Arthur, again in their living room, their voices lower now, more conspiratorial, but no less chilling. "Arthur, he knows what you did. Eleanor, Miller isn't stupid." Eleanor's reply sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. So what if he does? It's his word against mine. Sarah will never choose him over family. And if she does, then she's not the daughter I raised. She paused, a cruel smile playing on her lips. Don't worry, Arthur. I've already started talking to her about their little marriage problems, planting the seeds of doubt. By the time I'm done, she'll be filing for divorce and thinking it was her own brilliant idea. I slammed my laptop shut, my hands shaking, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't just about discrediting me or making me sick. This was a systematic, cold-blooded effort to destroy my marriage, to control Sarah's life utterly and completely, isolating her from anyone who didn't fit their narrow, self-serving vision. Imagine the ground crumbling beneath your feet, the people you trusted most, the very architects of your partner's world, revealed as the architects of your potential destruction. Sarah was at a precipice, whether she fully realized it yet or not, and the next step, the next revelation, would define everything. Sometimes, the most crucial support, the brightest glimmers of hope, emerge from the most unexpected corners, often from those who have walked similar, shadowed paths and understand the terrain of deceit. My first call was to Linda Vance. Her initials on that note were a lifeline. When she answered, her voice was quiet, cautious. "Linda," I said, my own voice tight with a mixture of gratitude and urgency. "The USB drive. Why did you send it to me?" There was a pause, then a soft sigh. "Because, David," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They did the same thing to me when I first married Robert, or tried to. They spent 2 years trying to break us up. Eleanor told everyone I wasn't good enough for her son, that I was only after the family money. Arthur was colder, more dismissive. It almost worked. She confessed that Robert, her own husband, still didn't know the full extent of his parents' machinations against their marriage. He worships his father," she explained sadly. "He believes everything Arthur says. I've tried to tell him, to show him, but he thinks I'm paranoid, that I'm exaggerating. I couldn't stand by and watch them do it to someone else, to you and Sarah, and not do something." Her courage, her quiet act of defiance, was a profound gift. The very next day, as if on cue from some dark, coordinated playbook, I received a text message from Arthur Vance. "David, we should talk, man to man." No wives. His attempt at asserting patriarchal authority was almost laughable. If the situation weren't so serious, we agreed to meet at the Oakwood Country Club, his preferred neutral ground, a bastion of his wealth and influence. He was already there when I arrived, comfortably ensconced in a private back room, a glass of bourbon swirling in his hand. "Julian," he began, using my name with a forced familiarity that grated. He'd always called me David. "Families are complicated, you know. My wife, Eleanor, she can be difficult at times, overprotective of Sarah, but she means well, deep down. Drugging someone, Arthur, is that what you call meaning well?" I asked, my voice level, refusing to be drawn into his disingenuous preamble. He waved his hand dismissively, a gesture of impatient magnanimity. "A misunderstanding? Purely. Eleanor takes Valerium for her anxiety. She probably just mixed up the glasses that night. A simple mistake." "I have the security footage from your house, Arthur," I stated flatly. "The footage showing her deliberately adding something to my drink. The footage of her screaming at you afterwards for drinking the wrong one. The footage where you yourself say, 'This isn't the first time you've done something like this.' Eleanor." His face changed instantly. The avuncular mask dissolved, replaced by a cold, calculating hardness. His eyes narrowed. "What do you want, Miller?" he sneered, the veneer of politeness gone. "Money, is that what this is all about? I always knew you married Sarah for financial reasons, not for love. I want you and Eleanor to leave us alone," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Stop trying to convince Sarah that I'm not good enough for her. Stop interfering in our marriage, in our lives." Arthur leaned forward, a humorless laugh escaping his lips. "You think this is the first time we've had to deal with someone like you? Someone trying to take advantage of our family, our good nature. Sarah will come home, Miller. She always does. She's a Vance. Ask her about Dr. James Albright, the the fiancé she had before you. A nice young man, an orthopedic surgeon at Clearview Regional Hospital. Promising career. We didn't like his background. His family wasn't quite right. It took us about 6 months, a bit of careful persuasion, to convince Sarah he was wrong for her, that he wasn't what he seemed. She broke it off, naturally, came home crying to Daddy. He smiled then, a smug, chilling expression. History repeats itself. Son, a cold dread seeped into my bones. This wasn't just about me, or even just about Eleanor's Valerium-fueled malice. This was a deeply ingrained pattern of control, a systematic dismantling of Sarah's autonomy, her choices, her relationships. On the drive home from the country club, my mind reeling, I called Carol Henderson, Sarah's old college roommate, someone I knew Sarah still occasionally kept in touch with. When I asked her about Dr. James Albright, Carol's response was immediate and pained. Oh God, David, that was awful. James was perfect for Sarah, truly. Everyone thought so. But her parents, Arthur and Eleanor, they just went to work on her. They convinced her he was cheating, that he was dishonest. They even managed to plant some sort of evidence. He tried to tell her the truth, to explain, but by then, they'd poisoned her mind so thoroughly against him that she didn't trust him anymore. She was devastated when it ended. The pattern was sickeningly, horrifyingly clear. This was what they did. This was who they were. I reached out to Dr. Albright himself. He was initially reluctant to speak with me, the wounds clearly still tender even after all these years. But when I explained the situation, when I told him about the drink, about the security footage, about Eleanor's plots to end my own marriage, he understood. He sent me copies of old emails, painful exchanges between him and Sarah, and between him and her parents, showing how Eleanor and Arthur had systematically, ruthlessly undermined their relationship, twisting facts, planting doubts, until Sarah felt she had no choice but to end it. I didn't stop there. I contacted other ex-boyfriends Sarah had mentioned from before my time, old friends of hers who had mysteriously, inexplicably drifted away over the years. A chilling narrative emerged. Anyone who encouraged Sarah's independence, anyone who didn't fit the Vance's narrow mold, was gradually, systematically pushed out of her life, often through campaigns of insinuation and outright lies orchestrated by Eleanor and Arthur. Linda, now a fully committed ally, provided more security footage, snippets of conversations between Eleanor and Arthur where they discussed their plans for Sarah and me. Once they divorce, Arthur said coolly in one clip, his voice devoid of any emotion, we'll convince her to move back home. She can run the family foundation, meet some suitable men we approve of. I compiled everything, the videos, the emails, the testimonies from Dr. Albright and Carol, Linda's statements, onto a single, comprehensive USB drive. The weight of it felt immense. Then, I invited Robert and Linda over for dinner, keeping the true agenda a secret, even from Sarah, for now. She needed to see it all, unfiltered, but in a supportive environment. The web of their deceit was far more extensive, far more insidious than I had ever imagined. It's a chilling thought, isn't it, that the narratives we believe about our loved ones, our own pasts, might have been carefully crafted, deliberately distorted by others. When the curtain is pulled back on such long-term manipulation, the sense of lost time, of stolen agency, can be overwhelming. And I knew, with a heavy heart, that Sarah was about to experience that full, devastating weight. There are moments in life, watershed moments, when the only way forward is to lay all the cards on the table, no matter how devastating the hand, no matter how much pain the truth will inevitably unleash. The carefully constructed facade of the Vance family was about to be shattered, and I knew the repercussions would be seismic. That Saturday evening, as Robert and Linda Vance sat in our cozy living room, making small talk with Sarah, the air was thick with an unspoken tension that only I, and perhaps Linda, fully comprehended. After dinner, as we gathered with coffee, I took a deep breath. There's something, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. Something you all need to see. Sarah looked at me, a question in her eyes. I connected my laptop to our television. For the next hour, The horrific truth spooled out in our living room. The security footage of Eleanor doctoring my drink. The chilling audio of her subsequent fight with Arthur. His damning admission. "This isn't the first time you've done something like this, Eleanor." Then came the clips of them plotting to break up my marriage, to manipulate Sarah into filing for divorce. I showed them the emails from Dr. James Albright, the heartbroken testimony of a man whose love for Sarah had been systematically destroyed by her parents' interference. I laid bare the pattern, the years of control, the web of lies. Sarah sat motionless, her face a mask of pale shock, her eyes fixed on the screen. Beside her, Robert, who had initially scoffed at the idea of his parents' culpability, grew increasingly agitated, his jovial demeanor crumbling. He kept shaking his head, muttering under his breath, "No, that's not my parents. It can't be." Linda quietly placed a hand on his arm, her own face etched with a somber understanding. When the last video file ended, a heavy silence filled the room, broken only by Sarah's ragged breathing. She turned to me, tears streaming down her face, her voice choked with emotion. "David, why didn't you tell me all of this sooner?" "Because, Sarah," I said gently, my heart aching for her pain. "I needed you to see it for yourself, all of it, not just what they did to me, but what they've been doing to you, to your life, for years." Robert suddenly stood up, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and disbelief. This has to be edited, manipulated. My parents wouldn't do these things." Linda's voice, though quiet, cut through his denial. "They did it to us too, Robert," she said, her eyes meeting his, filled with a sad certainty. "Remember how difficult they were when we first got engaged? How they tried to convince you I wasn't right for you? Why do you think they suddenly started liking me, approving of me, only after our son, James, was born? Because a grandchild, Robert, meant leverage. It meant they had another way to control us." The color drained from Robert's face as Linda's words, spoken with such quiet conviction, began to penetrate his wall of denial. He looked from Linda to the blank television screen, then to Sarah, his expression one of dawning horror. Later that night, long after Robert and Linda had left, their own relationship undoubtedly heading into a period of the difficult conversations, Sarah crawled into bed beside me. She was quiet for a long time. Then she turned, her eyes still shadowed with pain. "I need time to process all of this, David," she said softly. It's a lot, but I believe you, and I am so sorry I ever doubted you." The next morning, the inevitable call came. It was Eleanor, her voice dripping with false sweetness, suggesting Sarah should come stay with us for a while. "Darling, marriage can be so hard sometimes, and a little separation can give clarity." Sarah, her resolve now steely, put the call on speaker. "Mom," she said, her voice clear and firm, "I've seen the videos." A beat of silence on the other end. Then, Eleanor's flustered voice. "What videos?" "Dear, I don't know what you're talking about." "The security footage from your house." "Mom," Sarah continued, her voice unwavering, "of you drugging David's drink, of you and Dad plotting to break up my marriage." Eleanor began to stammer about manipulation, about David twisting things. "Stop," Sarah said, her voice cutting through her mother's excuses. "Just stop. We're coming over tonight, all of us, me, David, Robert, and Linda. We are going to talk about this as a family. No more lies." That evening, at the opulent Vance estate, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken accusations. As we gathered in the formal living room, I quietly set up a small tripod with my camera. "What are you doing, David?" Eleanor asked, her voice sharp. "I'm documenting this conversation," I replied calmly. "For the family archives." She started to object, calling it an invasion of privacy. "Exactly," I agreed. "Family business, and despite your best efforts, Eleanor, I am family." For the next 2 hours, we laid it all out. Every piece of footage, every email, every testimony. Eleanor and Arthur denied everything. Of course. They called me unstable, manipulative, a liar. But with each denial, I calmly played another video clip, showed another damning email. Their faces grew paler, their denials weaker. their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. Finally, Sarah stood up, her voice trembling but strong. "I love you both," she said, looking directly at her parents. "You are my parents, but what you've done, it's unforgivable. You don't get to control my life anymore. You don't get to control our lives." Robert, his face grim, nodded in agreement. "We're adults," he said, his voice heavy with disillusionment. "We choose our own partners. We choose our own paths." Eleanor finally broke, not with tears of remorse, but with the raw, frustrated tears of someone who has irrevocably lost control. Arthur just looked stunned, as if he couldn't comprehend that his children, his own flesh and blood, were defying him so completely. As we prepared to leave, the emotional wreckage still settling in the room, I walked over to Arthur and handed him the USB drive, the one containing every piece of evidence we had gathered. "This contains everything, Arthur," I said quietly. "The footage, the emails, the testimonies, it's yours to keep." He looked at the small drive in his hand, then at me. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked. "It means," I said, meeting his gaze, "that I'm not going to ruin your reputation by sharing this with anyone else. That would hurt Sarah, and I would never intentionally do that." I paused, letting the weight of my next words sink in. "But know this, if you ever try to interfere in our marriage again, if you ever try to manipulate Sarah or speak against me, copies of this drive will go to every single member of the Oakwood Country Club, to all your business partners, and to every influential person in your precious Maple Creek social circle." For the very first time since I had met him, Arthur Vance looked at me with something that vaguely resembled respect, or perhaps just a grudging understanding of a formidable opponent. "I underestimated you, Miller," he said, his voice low. "Yes, Arthur," I replied simply. "You did." 6 long months passed. Sarah and Robert began attending therapy together, trying to work through the profound damage their parents' actions had caused. Eleanor and Arthur, for their part, kept their distance, sending occasional, stilted texts, but respecting the firm boundaries we had established. Then, as the holidays approached, an invitation arrived to dinner at their house. A fresh start. The invitation read, Sarah, ever hopeful for some semblance of family, wanted to go. "They're still my parents, David," she said. "And maybe they're trying." I agreed, but I wasn't naive enough to believe they had fundamentally changed. The dinner was superficially normal. Eleanor had prepared a lavish feast. Arthur was surprisingly charming, asking about my latest photography projects with what appeared to be genuine interest. After dinner, he invited me into his study, the same room where he had first dismissed my career. He poured me a glass of expensive scotch. "I have a proposition for you, David," he said, his tone smooth, almost conciliatory. "I've been thinking about your career. Photography, well, it's been good to you. But have you considered diversifying your portfolio? I could bring you into my firm. Junior partner track. The salary would be substantial." I took the glass he offered but didn't drink from it. "Why would you do that, Arthur?" I asked, my voice neutral. "Your family," he said smoothly, his eyes glinting. "And frankly, I respect how you handled the unpleasantness earlier this year. You protected my daughter while standing your ground. That's what a real man does." I set the untouched glass down on his polished mahogany desk. "I appreciate the offer, Arthur, but no." His smile tightened. "David, be reasonable. This is an olive branch, a way for us to move forward, all of us." "No," I repeated. "It's another attempt at control. Arthur, you can't buy me, and you still can't stand the fact that Sarah loves me exactly as I am, for who I am." "Don't be a fool, Miller," he hissed, dropping the facade, his voice laced with familiar contempt. "Everyone has a price." "That's where you're wrong, Arthur," I said, standing up, "and that's why you'll never truly understand your daughter." I walked back to the dining room, where Eleanor was showing Sarah old photo albums. Sarah caught my eye across the room. She could see from my expression that something significant had happened in the study. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She stood up immediately. "Mom, Dad," she announced, her voice clear and strong, cutting through Eleanor's reminiscences. I have something to tell you. We're having a baby. David and I'm 3 months pregnant. The shock on their faces was genuine, unfeigned. Eleanor recovered first, rushing to embrace Sarah, tears welling in her eyes, whether of joy or something else. I couldn't be sure. Arthur approached more slowly, his gaze flickering between Sarah and me. "Congratulations," he said stiffly, his eyes unreadable. "Thank you," I replied. Then, lowering my voice so only Arthur could hear, I added, "This child, Arthur, will never be a pawn in your games. I promise you that." His face hardened for a moment, then he gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. He understood the message. 3 weeks later, a certified letter arrived from Arthur Vance's attorney. Inside, there was no personal note, no apology. Arthur wasn't capable of that. But there was a deed, transferring ownership of the house Sarah and I had been renting from them directly to us. And there were legal documents establishing a substantial trust fund for our unborn child. No conditions, no strings attached, just a clean, irrevocable transfer of assets. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, perhaps the only one he could give. It was a concession. We had, in our own quiet way, one, boundaries drawn in stone, not sand. Sometimes, the only language power understands is power itself, wielded not with malice, but with the undeniable weight of truth. But can such a fractured foundation ever truly be mended, or just managed? That remained to be seen. In the end, the loudest statements, the most definitive victories, are often not declared with shouted words or dramatic confrontations, but are instead revealed in the quiet, undeniable evidence of a life lived authentically, joyfully, and free from the suffocating shadows of manipulation and control. Our daughter, Emily Rose Miller, named after my beloved Grandma Rose, was born in the full bloom of summer. Her arrival was like a sunrise after a long, dark night, filling our Maple Creek home with a light and a love that felt pure and untainted. When Eleanor and Arthur Vance came to the hospital to see their first grandchild, they brought carefully chosen, expensive gifts. But more importantly, they maintained a respectful, almost tentative distance. They cooed over Emily, took a few photos, and then left without offering a single piece of unsolicited parenting advice or a lecture on financial planning for her future. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it felt significant, like the first thawing of a long, hard frost. Months passed, and our relationship with the Vances settled into something resembling a new, fragile normal. There were no heartfelt apologies for the pain they had caused. We knew better than to expect that. But they did stop trying to control Sarah's life, and they ceased their efforts to undermine my career or my place in the family. They seemed to understand, finally, that the old rules no longer applied, that the boundaries we had drawn were firm and non-negotiable. As Christmas approached that year, Eleanor called. Sarah relayed the message, "She wants us to come for Christmas dinner." I looked at Sarah, seeing the familiar flicker of hope and apprehension in her eyes. "What do you want to do?" I asked, because her feelings, her comfort, were paramount. "I think we should go," she replied after a moment's thought. "They're still my parents, and Emily's grandparents. But," she added, her voice firm, "with conditions. We stay at a hotel in town, not at their house. We arrive when we want, and we leave when we want, and absolutely no unsupervised time with Emily." I nodded. "Sounds perfectly reasonable to me." We were learning to navigate this new terrain together, on our own terms. 2 weeks before Christmas, a large, glossy envelope arrived, addressed to me from Arthur Vance's corporate office. Inside, there was no personal note, just a copy of his company's opulent annual report. My photographs, landscapes I had shot on spec, portraits of their key executives, architectural shots of their new headquarters, were featured prominently throughout its pages. These were images I had created on my own terms, without his interference or direction. Tucked inside the front cover was a small, embossed business card from Arthur. On the back, a brief, handwritten note. "Hired the best photographer I know. Thought you'd want a copy." V. It wasn't forgiveness, and it certainly wasn't reconciliation in the traditional sense, but it was something else. Respect. A tacit acknowledgement, from a man who measured worth in dollars and deals, that my skill, my art, had value. I didn't call to thank him. We both understood this wasn't about gratitude. It was about recognizing the new boundaries, the new reality we had forged. That following spring, a long-held dream of mine came to fruition. I opened the Main Street Gallery in Brookside, a charming nearby town known for its arts scene. The grand opening was a wonderful evening. Sarah stood proudly beside me, beautiful and radiant, with little Emily, now a babbling toddler, on her hip. My own parents flew in all the way from Colorado, their faces beaming with pride. Friends, clients, and fellow artists filled the bright, airy space, admiring the images I had captured over the years, the culmination of so much work, so much passion. Toward the end of the evening, Eleanor and Arthur Vance arrived. They didn't stay long. Eleanor held Emily for a few moments, carefully, almost reverently, under Sarah's watchful eye. Arthur, looking distinguished in a tailored suit, shook my hand firmly and then walked slowly around the gallery, nodding at the photographs with what appeared to be genuine approval. And then they left, without offering a single critique, a single suggestion about how I should run my business or arrange my displays. As Sarah and I locked up the gallery late that night, the scent of wine and success still lingering in the air, she leaned her head on my shoulder. "Do you think they've really changed, David?" she asked softly. I considered her question carefully, looking out at the quiet, moonlit street. "No," I said finally, honestly. "I don't think people like that fundamentally change, not in their core, but," I added, "I think they've finally accepted that they can't change us. And sometimes, Sarah, that's enough. Sometimes, that's everything." Later, as we sat on our own porch, the porch of the house that was now truly ours, watching the stars prick the dark Vermont sky, Emily asleep in her crib upstairs, a profound realization settled over me, a truth I had perhaps known for a while but had never fully articulated. I hadn't won by playing Arthur and Eleanor's manipulative game, by trying to outwit them or beat them at their own cruel sport. I had won by refusing to play their game at all. I had stood my ground, quietly and persistently. I had protected what mattered most, my love for Sarah, our marriage, our integrity. I had built my life, our life, according to our own definition of success, not with schemes or calculated power plays, but with honesty, with quiet persistence, and with an unwavering commitment to the family I love beside me. And in the end, that was the most satisfying revenge of all the quiet, undeniable victory of living well, on our own terms. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? That true strength often lies not in loud confrontation, but in quiet resilience, in the courage to define your own happiness and protect it fiercely, even, and perhaps especially, from those you once felt obligated to please, or whose approval you once craved. David's journey, my journey, shows us that sometimes the most profound changes come not from forcing others to see our worth, but from fully, unequivocally embracing it ourselves. What are the games in your own life, the unspoken rules or toxic dynamics that you've chosen to step away from, to find your own peace, your own authentic path? We'd be honored if you shared your reflections in the comments below. And if stories of quiet courage, of navigating complex family relationships, and the ultimate triumph of personal integrity resonate deeply with you, perhaps consider subscribing for more narratives that explore the deep, often challenging, currents of human experience. Until next time, may you find strength in your own truth and the courage to live it fully.